Good morning, everyone. Thank you for sticking around. Thanks for making it through the rain and the crazy New York City traffic today. We're going to talk MBAs this morning. And I'd like to introduce our panel. To my immediate right is Scott Beardsley, the Dean of the Darden School of Business at the University of Virginia. Next, Martina Hund-Mejean, Chief Financial Officer, MasterCard. Carolyn Miles, President and CEO, Save the Children. And Blair Taylor, CEO, My Brother's Keeper Alliance. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
So the MBA program, how many MBAs do we have in the room? Show of hands. Okay, pretty decent. What about the MBA students of today versus 10 or 15 years ago? I think a lot of us would agree that they're pretty different. The needs may be different. We have a much more fragmented job market now, sort of the culture of the high bonuses that the banking industry gave out. That culture that sort of lured people into business schools has lost a little bit of its luster. And so students are leaving these MBA programs and having a different career path, if you will. And I would think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the students of today have a much more entrepreneurial spirit. They're perhaps more socially conscious and globally aware than students of recent times. So what is the challenge for the MBA programs? And I'm going to begin with you, Scott, because that's a great place to begin. How are MBA programs changing to adapt to the changing needs of these MBA students of today?
Well, first and foremost, I think, MBA programs are about creating the leaders of tomorrow, and society has lots of big problems to change, and I think the millennials want to be part of solving the world's greatest issues. And so it's up to us to create leaders that are ready to lead in both a for-profit context and a not-for-profit context. I think just about everything, if you think about it, is a business. So for example, I'm in education, but before that I was in management consulting. And I believe both are businesses. I just happen to run a non-for-profit. But the issues are very similar. You still need to lead other people, you still need to have content, you need to know how to market your school. So the types of issues that we're dealing with in a business program today are good for both a for-profit and a not-for-profit arenas. And I think today's generation wants to make a difference. And so whether it is working on sustainability issues or learning to lead in finance, everything is a business, and we are adapting our programs to prepare leaders that are ready to go into any context in the world.
In what ways are you doing that? What specifically is the Darden School, for instance, doing to meet that challenge?
Well, for example, first of all, it starts with the student body. The student body needs to reflect, if you will, the type of global village that you want to have. We have about a third of our students are international. The types of cases that you teach in the classroom need to reflect the challenges of the day. But what we also do, a lot of people think business is just about teaching functions. What we try and do at Darden is teach leaders to deal with a number of different lenses. And what I mean by that is it's not just about making money, it's about delivering value to multiple stakeholders. It's about thinking holistically about the challenge facing business leaders. And that might mean delivering value to consumers. It might mean helping society create jobs. There's many different lenses that we put on it. We teach our students through experiential learning to think on their feet, to be critical thinkers, to communicate, to operate with teamwork. That's what we do. We have learning teams in all of our classes. You join a learning team throughout your first year. The curriculum is integrated. And we teach people to be ready to be general managers in whatever setting that may be. Another way of saying general manager is to be an entrepreneur. Because actually the entrepreneur is the type of person that needs to go out and deal with all the issues of their company. It's just at a smaller scale. So we have a very entrepreneurial-oriented program. We will fund any student that wants to start their own company in our iLab, and we will give them any number of courses on innovation and entrepreneurship. We have over 30 of them. And we also provide things like global consulting projects where they can pick a topic of their choosing, and they can go out and study that and deliver real impact to companies like some of the ones here on the stage.
It sounds like a mini Silicon Valley. There's a lot of venture capital money in that area now.
Well, there isn't. Surprisingly, at the University of Virginia, we're located in Charlottesville, Virginia, but what most people might not know is that Charlottesville was the fastest growing venture capital city in the United States this year. And entrepreneurship is something that is very vibrant in Charlottesville, partly because of the university with its life sciences focus, with the largest healthcare system in the state of Virginia, but also because a lot of business leaders are interested, young business leaders, in starting their own company and taking risks. And that's the type of student that I think is attracted to our program.
Martina, you are CFO of a global financial powerhouse, a for-profit company. How do you balance the for-profit with social progress? Where do you find that balance?
Yeah, this is very interesting. I mean, first of all, I think I was very fortunate when I joined the company 9 years ago, because as part of our IPO 10 years ago, the company actually put 10% of the stock into a Canadian foundation that does a lot of work on trying to solve the world's problems this day, and it's the largest Canadian foundation at roughly $10 billion or something like that. And that kind of set the tone, quite frankly, for a lot of our people, from the board to the CEO and all our people down. And what is really important for us is to be able to hire the right kind of people who are really involved in this kind of mission. So MasterCard is known as, the large technology network. We're connecting millions of buyers and sellers on a commerce platform in many countries, most countries in the world, 210 countries and territories. But, truth be told, there are about 2 billion adults in this world who are not financially included. And we know that financial inclusion, as soon as you're financially included in some way, you can actually become economically productive and get a country, really on their path. So what we did a number of years ago, 5, 6 years ago, we are sitting on this network and we said, whoa, we should be able to do something that in a scalable way allows these people to be financially included, and in a different way, right? And so we set ourselves a goal a number of years ago to include 500 million consumers out of these 2 billion, financial inclusion, serve them some products. So for instance, in Egypt, we are now connecting 60 million consumers on a mobile banking platform. They get their government benefits there, they get the payroll this way. We do it in Mexico from a social benefit point of view. We do it in South Africa. So there are a number of things. But in order to do that, you need the right people. So when you look at our interview process, there is a big part where we test people on social justice. And what I find fascinating, unlike when I grew up, when you're in high school, you didn't have to do community service. Today, in many countries, you have to do community service. So our kids are already starting on the right path, but still we test it. And then when you come into our company, you actually have a choice to be participating in a number of programs like, Girls That Code, okay, women entrepreneurship, financial inclusion, etc. And then we infuse it also in our leadership programs. So any programs that you're taking in MasterCard, and we have quite a few of those, you get included in, so the social justice and what we can actually do to improve the world, we do. So as a CFO, I actually look at it as completely part of our business. I mean, we truly believe that our business will not do well if we don't do something good and participate in what's going on in the world.
Carolyn, to jump off that, public-private partnerships is a lot of what you do at Save the Children. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure, and I think this is critically important. My background is I did get an MBA. I went on to a corporate career and was an entrepreneur and then came into the nonprofit world. And so I have seen tremendous change in the time that I've been at Save the Children, which is a while now, in terms of corporate partnerships. So we probably have partnerships with about half of the Fortune 500 and many, many smaller companies. And it's because, at the end of the day, we are trying to solve really big problems. So we're trying to end the preventable deaths of kids under 5 around the world, right? And there are 5 million children that die of things that they don't, more than 5 million, about 5.5 million, that die of things that we can prevent. We're not going to be able to solve that problem by ourselves. It takes partnerships with governments. It takes partnerships with companies. So I'll give you one good example, Johnson & Johnson. So we care about mothers and babies. Johnson & Johnson cares about mothers and babies. So we start with this common value, really, that and that our work is built on. Their business is built on that. Our work is built on that. And so we start with this goal, and we set a goal that we're going to reach 1 million mothers and babies and make their lives better in the developing world. And you start with that goal, and then you look at what are all the different ways that you can do that. And it's not just about writing us a check. We like checks. I will take checks. If anybody has one, you can bring it to me. But it isn't just about that. It's about programs in countries where J&J works. It's about advocacy. We work together in Washington, D.C. and capitals around the world to try to get governments to care about whether kids survive in their countries and whether our government and other donor governments like Germany give money to those kinds of programs. We work on marketing campaigns together. So J&J helps us. We have a current effort with Facebook that J&J helped us negotiate where we're doing videos to show what's happening around the world. So those are things that J&J can bring to the table. We can bring a lot to the table. We work in 120 countries. We have 25,000 people who work for Save the Children all around the world. Most of them are local people in those local countries where we work. So those are long-term partnerships. We've worked with J&J for probably 30 years. So this takes a long time to get to these kind of global scale partnerships. But those are the ones that endure. Those are the ones that last. You need to start with what are our goals together? How do they fit for how do they drive your business? And how do they drive our work? And when you find that synergy, I think that really makes something magic.
And Blair, you moved from corporate America into the non-for-profit with My Brother's Keepers Alliance. Before that, you were with Starbucks, where you were an integral part of their community outreach program. Talk to me about the work you're doing with My Brother's Keeper Alliance right now.
Yeah, I also want to just build on this point that corporate America now, I think, is awakening to the reality that you must do well and do good. And I think in many ways that's opening new doors of collaboration with the nonprofit sector that in my 25 years of working on both sides of that equation, I haven't seen this moment. And there have been some organizations like Save the Children that have done a great job of collaborating with corporate America. But I think what we're seeing now is corporate America is actually starting to understand that it's an imperative. It's a business imperative for them to get involved socially. It's not a nice to do. And so it's actually coming out of the philanthropic arm of corporate America and moving sort of into the engine, into the hiring, into all of the things that kind of make corporate America go. And I think that's a really important thing because it's a great moment and opportunity for all of us who are in the nonprofit sector and for corporate America to start those collaborative things because neither sector will solve this by itself. So that's a really important point. My Brother's Keeper, launched by the president a couple of years back, and the 501c3 that I'm the CEO of was launched about a year ago, and it is the continuity element that we're going to continue after President Obama leaves the White House, so we're kind of getting ready for that moment. But we are off busy at work now engaging with corporations. Interestingly enough, we had a great launch event in the city of Oakland a couple of weeks back, which was fantastic, and we're focused right now on the pre-K all the way to post-college, but we're zooming in particularly on that employment segment for boys and men of color. So My Brother's Keeper is an initiative focused on low-income communities broadly, boys and men of color more specifically, and really trying to figure out how to get some of these disenfranchised populations back into action, into the American economy. And so we did an incredible event in Oakland. We're going to be doing another one in the city of Detroit coming up in the weeks ahead. But at this one event, I just want to take a minute just to dimensionalize what can happen when the corporate sector, the nonprofit sector, and the government sector come together. We had a fantastic day. 1,000 boys and men of color showed up, 600 job interviews with corporations, 35 different companies on the scene, 20 nonprofits. So it really wasn't a job fair, it was an opportunity fair, and that's the kind of thing we're looking for, where a young person walks in, they may be looking for a job, they may need mentoring, they may need resume writing, they may need help with interviewing. You can get all of these different kinds of services at one of these events, and 350 of them walked away with jobs that day. So That's a really important number too, because that number is actually about 50% higher than the typical interview to hire ratio for these Fortune 500 companies. And they're going after a disenfranchised, quote unquote, population. So I think a lot of eyes are opening to the lost talent that we haven't been cultivating in this country, in our urban population centers as well. So great moments, I think, in terms of bringing corporate America into the fold.
Very encouraging, for sure. Martina?
Can I
Yep.
just jump in, because both of you mentioned, of course, what corporations have to do and what non-for-profit have to do. This partnership, building the partnership with governments and with NGOs and with for-profit entities, that requires a really different skill set. And I'm a Darden grad, for full disclosure, and I graduated in 1988, as did Carolyn. And
You were classmates, right?
yeah, we are classmates, actually. But we didn't, the MBA program at that point in time was different. And so as I, for instance, had to develop more in my various jobs and what the company needs to do, and realizing some of these changes, we had to apply this lifelong learning that you might want to talk a little bit about, in terms of really understanding, how do you actually negotiate with a government? How do you do that with an NGO? Because you all have a little bit of different maybe goals or approaches, but in the end, if you do this and if you can really learn how to do this, you can align to the value set that actually matters and makes a tremendous difference to the world. But this is something that, the young kids coming out today, well, they're not that young anymore, but that is what we are looking for. This is what really, they need to be adaptable in many different forms.
That's an excellent point, that there is a different skill set now that these students need to graduate with, also for the new economy, and I want to talk a little bit about that, jumping off Martina's point. How about things like climate change, sustainability, areas that were not nearly as important and in the forefront 10 or 15 years ago? How are you making sure that these students are graduating with the right skill set for the new economy?
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, we teach classes in the sustainability arena or on topics such as water, major issues of the day. But to your point on public-private partnerships, it's all about stakeholder management. So at Darden, we have what we call the Institute for Business and Society. And what we teach our students to think about is it's not just about shareholder value creation narrowly writ. What you really have to think about is value overall to all the different stakeholders. And one person's definition of value that they care about, maybe it's a government or maybe it's an NGO, may not be the same as what the shareholder has. So you have to think about the different trade-offs that you make, because actually businesses operate inside of a contract, and the contract is either an implicit or an explicit contract. And if you're not careful in thinking about your license to operate, it can change. And what we find is that industries that do not take care in thinking about the broader interests of stakeholders find themselves subject to much greater regulation. And then that regulation can in turn impact your shareholder value. So it's actually a fine equation where you have to take into consideration a multiplicity of people and stakeholders. It's not just about narrowly defined shareholder value creation next quarter. Yes, you have to be aware of that. But in many cases, you have to think about the broader set of implications, and that is what we try and do at our business school, is to make our students more aware of those issues. And also you have to realize that climate change issues or sustainability issues or large-scale infrastructure issues are also very large business issues. In order to solve these problems, we need business to be involved. If they're not involved, who's going to solve the problem all by themselves? Businesses need to work with governments. They need to work with NGOs. They need to work with nonprofits to solve these problems. They are huge problems facing the world. And so we try and teach our students today to be aware of that multiplicity of actors. And some of the people decide to go work directly in the not-for-profit space, and some want to go and work in the for-profit space for organizations that want to do good.
I just want to pick up on some of Scott and Martina, all the comments that have been made. The other thing that is so apparent to me is when we look at some of these large-scale problems, and they are global issues, most of the corporations now that are being successful are obviously global. So, one of the things that we're working on this week, and some of you may be involved and engaged in, is the refugee situation. So there are 65.3 million people who are either refugees or displaced, forcibly displaced from their home. 65.3 million. So if you don't think that's a business problem, you're wrong. That is a huge business problem. And we actually did some work to look at what would that country look like if all those people lived in the same country. It'd be the 21st largest country in the world. And this is really, I think, urgent. It is the fastest growing country in the world. So 34,000 people every single day are forcibly displaced. Half of that 65 million are kids under the age of 18, which is why we care so much about it. So, and this mythical country has very poor education rates. They have very poor health results. But on the optimistic side, if you looked at the earning power of the people in that country, if they could earn the average, they'd be the 54th largest country in GDP. So the opportunity is there. But if we don't do something about harnessing that opportunity, it is going to have huge, and already is having huge ramifications on the business world. So to me, that's an example of a very large, global, very difficult, very political, has all the ramifications of a very hard to solve problem. But if we don't get governments, organizations, nonprofit organizations, and businesses to sit down and say, what are we going to do about this? It is going to have huge ramifications. Obviously, it already is. So another example.
I mean, I think part of the just to cut to what the problems are. Part of the problem is, and we've sort of mentioned this a little bit, is that there's a different language that's spoken between the nonprofit sector, the for-profit sector, and the government sector. And I've actually spent time in all three, and most recently as chief community officer at Starbucks. But I think that what I often tell nonprofit leaders is if you're trying to solve a problem in your community, especially if it has to do with economics and jobs, and you look around the room and there are no for-profit companies in the room, something's wrong. Like you need to just stop yourself and say, we need business in the room having this discussion. I feel a little like a fish out of water up here because I'm the only one who's not associated with Darden. I actually went to UCLA. Are there any UCLA business school grads in the room?
There you go.
Okay, you and me, we got it going like that. It's good.
Go Bruins.
Go Bruins. But I will. I'm actually a little jealous today of today's MBAs because I think they have this opportunity for such a diverse spectrum of options in their career. And I remember when I was going to business school way back in the early 90s, you know, they would talk about you're probably going to have 3 or 4 different careers. And that was a huge shift for my dad, who had basically one career when he came out. I think today these young people are looking at, 8, 10 different things that they'll be going through, and the diversity of those experiences that they're already having at a young age. I mean, many of them have started nonprofits by the time they get to business school, much less working in a nonprofit. I think that kind of ingenuity is going to help unlock so much in the social sector in terms of problems that we're facing as a country and problems that we're facing globally. So it's a different kind of a day today than it was.
I like that point that you're making, and what I tell the business school students or those that are considering it is that the legal retirement age today in Australia is 70. So imagine what it will be, 20 or 30 years from now. You're going to have many careers, and in a world where there is incredible uncertainty, and many of the jobs of tomorrow have not even been created. We don't even know what the industries of tomorrow will be. Imagine where we were 20 years ago. Did we imagine today's Facebooks and Googles emerging? That in that environment where there's incredible uncertainty and volatility from a career point of view, the value of options goes up. We know that from financial theory. More volatility, the more an option is worth. Same thing goes for your career. So if you're a young, aspiring student, you want to do good in this world, but you don't know what it is that you want to do, a business school education is a fantastic platform to give you the optionality to make a difference, whether it's at Save the Children or MasterCard or My Brother's Keeper. There's many different ways to make a difference. And that's why I actually believe that business school is becoming more relevant today than ever before. And it's not just going to be the MBA, it's going to be the lifelong learning. I believe we're going to see a longer-term continuous relationship between the business schools and their alumni, or others that come in and out that maybe didn't take the business school degree. They want to keep learning as they've moved through their career. That's why we have alumni career development officers now that are helping people in their 40s and 50s that are changing careers mid-career like I did.
Transitioning,
Transitioning like I did.
Right.
And we're finding that to be more common. So I think we're going to see more and more of that as we go forward.
Because we're reinventing ourselves more and more, right? The idea, I love what you said, Blair, of, my father too, you graduate, you start with one company, you stay there for life, you leave with a nice pension, and you're done. But that doesn't happen for the folks nowadays. And it is a wonderful education in the sense that you can go off and do so many different things. You're all MBA grads, but look at all the different roads that you've taken. But it's also a road that many people simply can't afford because the top tier MBA programs are out of reach for many people. What do you think the role of the government, for-profit, non-for-profit, is to help defray the cost? And I'm just going to throw this out to the panel for MBA programs today.
I'll take the first crack. The affordability and accessibility is a huge issue for the nation in the educational arena. And it doesn't just apply to business school, it applies first and foremost to undergraduate. So a lot of students are graduating with large debt coming out of undergraduate education. We have to find a way to reduce that. I forget the latest statistics, it's on the order of $1.4 trillion and rising, default rates also rising. That's a lot of money, and it's growing above the rate of inflation. So we have to find a way to keep that under control. I think business schools have the advantage of sometimes providing a career path where you can earn a decent living to pay back some of your loans. But we do see the challenge of our incoming students already having a large amount of debt, and business school is expensive. So one of my priorities as a dean is to raise money for need-based aid for those who cannot afford otherwise to come to business school, to take that off the table, which has the additional benefit of when you graduate, knowing that you can do whatever you want without having to just take the highest paying job because you have a wall of debt in front of you. So that is I think we're going to see more and more activity there, certainly among the top business schools, to make it absolutely affordable. But the best thing that governments can do is, first of all, to lower interest rates on student loans, which are way, way above the LIBOR rates. I don't understand why students have to pay 6 or 7% when you can borrow, banks can borrow at 0, 1%. I don't get it.
Money's very cheap now, so that's a good point.
And secondly, to find a way to reduce the amount of debt that students are incurring.
Yeah, I would take this from a little bit of a different perspective. I think the funding piece, the debt issue is hugely important. But I think in order to increase diversity, which I think is really the question in higher education, wherever that might be, we also have to do a better job at training, making sure that kids, particularly from the worst off neighborhoods and the worst off parts of our country, actually have the opportunity to get up the chain. Because I think the debt issue will solve some of the diversity issue, and I think that is actually our biggest problem. And again, when we go back to kind of what we've been talking about, solving these global problems takes a lot of different perspectives. It takes diverse perspectives. We really need to get that diversity in higher education. So a lot of work we do is on getting, poor kids into high quality primary school education, just learning to read so they can keep going and then have the opportunity for higher education. And I think at the top, it's diversity.
Yeah, and I know, Blair, you work directly with some of these children that Carolyn's talking about.
I would say it's not just government. I mean, I would love to see us do more with loan forgiveness with respect to service. So if somebody really goes into the service, we can play that out at the government level. But I think there's two other things that a lot of these institutions are sitting on incredible endowments right now, and the question of how is that money being spent? Is it being spent really for social good? Can it be spent in a more effective way to increase diversity on campuses, to increase the well-being of communities that surround these universities? I think that's a real question that we need to push on in the 21st century, because we've got some massive endowments with some of these institutions. And then the third thing I'd throw out is I think there's a role for corporate America. When I was at Starbucks, we launched something called the College Achievement Plan, which was if you worked at Starbucks for 20 hours a week as a barista, still in place today, By the way, anybody who has kids and you want to get them to work at Starbucks for 20 hours a week, you can go and get a degree from Arizona State University online, tuition free, right? This is a company that's saying we want to have a contribution to social good, which I think is really important, and we recognize the value of an educated workforce from the undergrad perspective. And those are the kinds of things that I think we could grow into graduate level. And again, the companies aren't doing this purely for altruistic reasons. I mean, I loved Starbucks when I worked there, but you know, the sale on this, that was launched through my team when I was at Starbucks. The sale on it was as much around social good, and it was as much around the benefit for the company as it was in the long term for social good. And what I mean by that is when somebody gets a college degree, they earn $1 million+ more over the course of their career. They have a 50% lower probability of being unemployed at any time in their career, and therefore, they, as a result of that, you know, in the old Henry Ford model, they're going to buy a lot more of your product because they were wealthier to be able to do that. That's actually a virtuous circle. There's nothing wrong with that as an incentive for companies to invest in the workforce. I think we need to think about creatively how do companies start taking some of those kinds of initiatives to the graduate school level, particularly to the MBA.
And Martina, I'd imagine that's one of your challenges.
Well, it is, but you know, from my accent, you could tell I didn't grow up in this country. I grew up in Germany, and education is free in Germany, all the way up through the university level and the graduate level. And free is, of course, you know, somebody pays for it. The government pays for it. But it's relatively affordable if you actually want to go there and do this. But when you come as a student to the United States, which I did, you suddenly realize how well endowed the universities in this country are. I mean, they have resources and teachers and facilities that you can only dream of in a country where you don't really have many private universities, right? So I really think there's a balance, but there's one other thought that I would like to introduce is not everybody should be going for university. And for instance, in Germany, a big part of the population goes for apprenticeships. And those apprenticeships are actually paid for by companies. I was an apprentice at Deutsche Bank. You get a monthly stipend, which actually helps you. You still live at your parents' house, but then you go to vocational school, and you have that mixture of learning on the job and going to school. After that, you could go to university if you want to, or you actually get launched in a fantastic job. And that's for many, many different things. And I think part of this country is wrestling, you know, do you really all want to go to college? Or is there maybe something where corporate America can help more to be doing that? You know, I grew up in the auto industry at General Motors. You know, that would be just something that we could put out in this country in a much bigger way than what we're doing at this point in time. So that goes a little bit away from the MBA, but you know, if you go through these kind of engagements, eventually you could do your MBA too. Affordability, quite frankly, is a huge thing. When I came and did my MBA, I kind of had to scratch everything together, and I got a scholarship and some loan from UVA. But today, that's not even easily possible just because of the cost of the MBA.
And great point that sometimes higher education is not for everyone. And an MBA program is not for everyone and not the path that they should take. We have remaining moments, and I'd just like to open the floor to questions. So please, if you have any questions, if you can stand up and speak loudly so we can all hear. Yes. Oh, are you there with the mic for? Oh, great. So you don't have to speak that loudly because we have someone with a microphone who will come and find you. So if you have any questions, one right here.
Hi, thank you so much for this panel. I really enjoyed it. Scott, I'm a 2014 grad of the iLab at UVA. And while I was at the iLab, I co-founded a nonprofit called Dreamwakers. And what we do is use free video chat like Skype and Google Hangouts to bring diverse leaders into high-need public school classrooms in the U.S. And last week, we had a speaker from my brother's keeper. So full circle here with this panel. My question is, one thing that we struggle with is getting a foot in the door in corporate America. We really want to become a self-sustaining nonprofit organization with corporate partnerships, but we struggle, I think, maybe with the corporate language that you alluded to earlier, and how to, when you're not a safe, you know, you're not as big as Save the Children, how do you really get in for that first meeting and sell your pitch when you're just a startup nonprofit?
Yeah, maybe I can start on that one. I think the most important thing is looking for that synergy, looking for that that connection between your mission and what the company, either their business model or their philanthropic model, looking for where that connection is. And I think that's for you, the technology companies seem like they would be, for example, a really good place to start. And being able to put together your pitch on why this will be not just good for you, but why it would be good for them. That can be the hardest part, is coming up with why is this a good business decision for these companies. But you have to look for that and look for that synergy, because otherwise, I think getting in to have that first conversation is not going to be very successful.
The other thing I would add to that is just try to buddy up with another nonprofit who's already in the door.
Yeah, good point.
All too often in the nonprofit sector, we don't work together very well. We're fiercely independent. We do things on our own. We're funded to be independent. But we need to break down some of those barriers and approach it with somebody who has the reputation or the relationship with a big corporation or the Rockefeller Foundation or the Ford Foundation, who otherwise might not be able to see you as a new, young nonprofit. But if you can create that connection, I think you can get in the door and get some good exposure.
I can only emphasize the comments here from Caroline and Blair. All too often we are seeing smaller entities coming, and they're really after the check. Okay, they want the check, they want this, and that is, I have to tell you, when you look at corporate America, that's not really that prevalent as the first step. The first step is, what's the value? What can we create together? How can we work together? Then some money will come. Okay, but so it's very reverse than when you look at it 20 or 30 years ago.
Great question. Thank you. Any other questions for our panelists?
Good morning. My name is LaDon Mantegi. I'm with the Global Social Enterprise Initiative at Georgetown's McDonough School of Business. Dean Beardsley and the other panelists, we actually tend to find that the nonprofit sector is becoming far more sophisticated in understanding the language and the skill sets, as well as the value that corporations can bring to the table, but also the value that they can bring to companies in helping them advance their business objectives. Unfortunately, from the business side, increasingly when the nonprofits are approaching, they're directed to the CSR or philanthropy continuously. But where the value really is and where they know they can help from the market standpoint is inside the core business. Are you having any success, or Martina or others, in getting people from the business line to understand that there is a real business opportunity for product improvement, for service development improvement by collaborating with the nonprofits?
This is an excellent question, and I have to tell you, we stumbled our way there. But what we did is we gave our vice chair actually a task many years ago to be really figuring out how we pull this together. So the philanthropy part, but also the business part. And he actually built a Center for Inclusive Growth. And that Center for Inclusive Growth is that's more the non-for-profit part. But what we then did is we pulled product managers together, and we put one person into a particular very high-profile business unit, and they are all for-profit, but they're weighing the balance. And the lady spoke yesterday at Save the Children, so Caroline knows her well. But we had to embed it eventually into our product managers, and then what we did, we also put it into our regions. So I give you a great example. For instance, the refugee crisis that Caroline was mentioning, we were thinking, gosh, we must be able to do something for those really, really poor people who have to leave the country and whatever, and they're congregated and they're getting, from World Food Program or something, they're getting food, etc. And we found by a lot of people working together in the company with our product managers that we can actually adapt our network and deliver digital food. So that means you get a cart, and on there it's, you get so many liters of milk and water and whatever, rice, etc. You can actually take that cart to the local, community where you're located as a refugee, and actually encourage the business in that community so that the local community not just says, oh God, we have all these refugees, but they never buy from me. And you can actually start to have some commerce going. We would have not been able to come up with that. And this is a very small example. By the way, 300 million Syrians have that card at this. I got the number a little bit wrong on this one, but it's hugely impactful for us. But we couldn't have come up with that if our product people and our IT people wouldn't have worked together. So if we would have just kept that into a philanthropic area, would have never taken off.
I would just add that I think more and more you are seeing the business teams actually taking the lead. And again, that's where really you're driving sustainable partnerships. So one small example, GlaxoSmithKline is another partnership with Save the Children. And one of the things we were looking at, again, it goes back to saving the lives of kids under 5. Many newborn babies die of infection. And so one of the things they've developed is a more stable formula of a product called chlorhexidine. It goes on the baby's umbilical cord. That's how the infections get to the babies when they're very young. So we worked with them to develop a formulation of that product that could be used in places that are very harsh climates, very difficult, has to be very stable, and then rolled that product out for use in these birth clinics and these government hospitals in many of the countries where kids are dying under 5. We could never have done that with the philanthropic, with the foundation of GSK. We could only do that with the business, the R&D team in this case.
All I can say is you are so right on with the way you're thinking about it. You look at the philanthropic, I was a president of a foundation at Starbucks. You look at the philanthropic budget, you compare that to the marketing budget, the operating budget, the human resources budget, and I got to tell you, a company might spend $20 million a year on making this number up, but $20 million a year on philanthropy and $300 million a year on marketing and $700 million a year on some of their operating supporting methods for their employees, including training and the like, which means that if you can align yourself with those bigger budgets, you obviously have access to a lot more dollars and a lot more impact. What that translates into for those of us in the nonprofit sector, and I will do this all the time, I will try not to make the philanthropic pitch. I'll figure out what's in the engine of a company. What are you looking for? In the case of what I described earlier, companies are looking for talent. That is the engine of America's companies. They want people. And if you can find a way to tap into talent pools that they haven't figured out how to tap into, you're right in the middle of that engine. There's other ways of doing that with marketing and other things, but your question is spot on. And I think all nonprofits need to begin to think that way.
I would even turn it around and say, it's in corporations' self-interest to proactively be thinking about what are the NGOs that they want to engage with. Because my experience from being a management consultant and focusing on a lot of regulated companies is that regulated industries, 30 to 50% of the value of a company can be at stake through regulation if it's not taken care of. So the typical person that's worrying about this is actually the CEO or the very top management. The nonprofit should not only be focused on the CSR department. The real issue is strategic at the level of the CEO and chairman. Because if they don't get it right, what happens is they get re-regulated. And often that comes through societal unhappiness with what the companies are doing, which then leads to, we need to change the rules of the game here. So I believe that it's in corporations' self-interest to be thinking about these things proactively and engaging with the NGOs, with the regulators, with consumer groups, and to be very thoughtful about where they find win-wins. If they don't, what happens is dramatic change and large shareholder value moves.
Well, you're going to have the last word on that, Scott. Thank you so much. My thanks to our panel, Scott, Martina, Caroline, Blair, and to all of you for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your day here.